One of the most important incidents of the war in Angola was the capture of the South African Sergeant Johan Papenfus by the Cubans on May 4, 1988. On May 2, 1988, following a South African airstrike on FAPLA positions south of Chipa, the Cuban commander of the 40th Tank Brigade dispatched a mixed FAPLA Cuban company to set up an ambush. The force was composed of 81 men, 61 Cubans and 20 FAPLA soldiers, and was heavily armed with anti-tank weapons, including 18 RPGs, in anticipation of an encounter with South African armor. On May 4, shortly after midnight, the ambush was positioned 1 mile south of Donguena. 2 platoons dug trenches on the west side of the road, while a third platoon was positioned behind them with 6 RPGs. At 4 p.m., the Cuban soldiers heard tank engines approaching from the southwest. It was a South African force, consisting of 20 mine-resistant armored vehicles, Caspers, and 2 trucks, sent from Calicut to occupy Donguena. The advancing force drove directly into the Cuban trap. When the enemy was near the ambush, the Cubans fired the RPGs, disabling the lead Casper. The barrage of bullets and shrapnel forced the South African soldiers to scatter and take cover. As the combat continued, the Cubans quickly knocked out 2 more Caspers, forcing the South Africans, whose commander had been wounded, to call for assistance from Calicut. The battle then degenerated into intense close-quarters fighting. Several Cubans were crushed by the moving South African armored vehicles during the brutal combat, but they were able to destroy a 4th Casper with a point-blank RPG shot. The South Africans made desperate attempts to recover the abandoned vehicles, but all their efforts proved futile. In the middle of the combat, one of the Cuban soldiers, Bernardo Heredia, known to his comrades as Shogun, found a wounded South African soldier near one of the destroyed Caspers and ordered him to surrender under the threat of shooting him if he did not. Seriously wounded, the South African, Sergeant Johan Papenfus, surrendered and was made a prisoner by Heredia. As night fell, the South Africans pulled back to regroup. Several hours later, after being reinforced, the South African commander sent 3 companies to occupy Donguena, but they encountered what they suspected were tank positions south of the town. Fearing another ambush, the South Africans called off the attack, and the Cubans were able to withdraw under cover of darkness. Although both sides suffered many casualties in the combat, the ambush in Donguena was hailed by the Cubans as a victory. They had destroyed 3 Caspers, captured a 4th, and seized a considerable amount of weaponry and equipment. More notably, they had captured their first South African prisoner since 1976. As a new round of negotiations between Angola, South Africa, and Cuba had only just begun, the capture of Papenfus gave Cuba a card to play at the conference table. Following Castro's orders, Papenfus was urgently taken to Cuba to receive medical attention. He was treated at the best Cuban hospital and was even visited by his family. Papenfus expressed gratitude for the treatment he received, but the Cubans were shocked when he was interviewed by a famous journalist several months after being imprisoned. When asked if he would be willing to go to war again, his answer was, "Yes, I would do it. For my country, I would do it again." Less than a year later, when the war was about to end, the young South African sergeant was exchanged for 3 Cuban soldiers and 14 Angolan officers who were prisoners of war in South Africa. Continue watching our videos if you want to learn more stories about the war in Angola. Thank you.